This presentation, Poles of the Future, Archetypal Images, is for the Introduction to Global Future Studies class at the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies in Seoul, Korea. And it's largely based on a paper by Dr. Sohail Inayatullah called The Six Pillars of Foresight. And some parts are based on Chapter 4 of the book Contemporary Futurist Thought, Theories and Paradigms of the Future by Dr. Thomas Lombardo. Okay, so first of all, to try to get the best plausible future that we can, we have to consider three forces. It's very critical. And each force represents a time frame: present, future, and the past. Now, if we turn, and these are all respectively called the push of the present, the pull of the future, and the weight of history. Now, let's consider the push of the present first. And that actually is part of what's called the futures triangle. So, let's look at pushes of the present. What does that mean? Well, it's the quantitative drivers and trends that we see at work, at play in the present, that are changing the future or creating a plausible future. It's one force that's helping to create a plausible future. And to give it some examples, there's, for example, aging population. We're living longer, having fewer children. So, what does that mean? What future is this creating? What is the plausible future then from this quantitative driver and trend? Or another example would be increased military spending and arms exports, which is largely by the U.S. Military-industrial complex, especially since 9/11. There's other members of the UN Security Council as well. And if we look at the global situation since 9/11, as a result, there has been a state of permanent war. This war on terror is the longest war in American history by far. I think it's longer than all other wars put together, as a matter of fact. And has it actually made that much progress in reducing what was considered the main problem of terrorism? No, it hasn't. I mean, today we can say the terrorism is just as much of a threat, if not more, than it was then. So, and largely because at the same time, it produces terrorists. The effect has been a state of permanent war in various regions. Largely, like, for example, since 9/11, that's what we've seen. A state of permanent war with no end in sight, the war on terror. And we look today, it doesn't seem that terrorism isn't any less of a threat than it was then. So it's perpetual. The U.S. military-industrial complex then increases the military spending and arms exports as a result. That creates more terrorism and so on. So it is a kind of positive feedback loop. And that leads us to a state of permanent war. Well, those are just two examples of how we can understand the plausible future as a result of the pushes in the present. But let's take a look at one of the other forces, that of the weight of history, which represents the past squarely. And that is, for every vision of the future, there are barriers to the changes that you or any person or organization wants to see. There will always be weights or barriers to those changes. For example, those who pursue a globalized vision of the world, they get weighed down by nationalism, ethnocentrism, or post-colonialism, because those forces don't want that vision of the future. They oppose it. So they act as barriers. And they have a historical dimension, usually, right? They don't want to see those changes. Traditionalists also want to also have their own, vision of the future. That is, they want to maintain their traditional values. Oftentimes they react to those who are attempting to bring about change. But their vision of the future is weighed down by the dominance of hierarchy, whether that be male or expertise, technocratic society or empire. And the guiding myth is the boss is always right, or might makes right. Each image has a different weight. Okay, so before we consider the third factor, which is the pulls of the future, we need to understand how it acts as a magnet that pulls. It's an image of the future that acts as a magnet that pulls you towards it in order to realize it. So, and the reason why it has power to do that is because you believe in it. So we want to investigate then how different beliefs can affect the model of change and therefore realize a as a result. If you build it, they will come. If you believe in it, then you will make it happen. So the future becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So how much do our beliefs affect our future? Do we believe, for example, that society is a necessary response to the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest, and perpetual warfare? Because we believe that humans are essentially brutish, lazy, or even evil when in a state of anarchy, and thus we need society, we need laws and government to protect humans from themselves. Or do we believe that humans are actually good? That it's society and government that's the principal evil? So lasting change doesn't come from society, it comes from spiritual discipline and inner transformation. These two fundamentally different beliefs, and they're both competing with each other. And there are others as well. For example, is it institutional change? Is that the key? So for example, if we change laws and social structures, then that's how we can affect real change. Or do we believe that deep change is impossible? You can't beat the system. You can't fight City Hall. It's always been like that, and it always will be like that. Or is it technology that brings about real change? We create the technology, and then the technology creates avenues for social change to occur. And that's how the plausible future is realized, through technology. Technology is the main driver. Or is it a creative minority? As Arnold, the great historian Arnold Toynbee said, that it's the creative minority in every society that makes the critical difference and brings about social change. They lead the way. They're progressives who lead the way towards new systems. Well, these are the big questions. They're what macro historians, philosophers, grand thinkers have been wrestling with these for thousands of years. And I don't know if there's any definitive answers, but that's not the point. The point is, how does your beliefs, what you think, your image of the future, how does that affect the future that actually is, comes about? We're living in the future of what people believed in the past. But if they believed something different, we'd be living in a different future too. It would make a difference. It didn't have to be this way, in other words. So do you believe the future is mere luck? Or is it the result of karma? Or is it perhaps synchro destiny, as Deepak Chopra asserts? Or is the future a planned, rational activity? It's created by risk analysis and choice. Or is the future totally open? Hey, anything's possible. The world's a magical place. What's your metaphor of the future? Perhaps the future's like a game of snakes and ladders, which requires hard work to build, but can come down, can come crumbling down, just like that. So the world is scary. It's a scary place. And at any time, the gains can suddenly disappear. Or is the future like a machine? Regular, predictable, clockwork. Patterns, once seen, can help identify what will happen, because it will continue to happen. It will continue to be that way in the future. The machine is very predictable. So what's your metaphor for the future? We talked about that in class before, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but just quickly we'll review a few of these. The dice game, which is the sort of unpredictable, random, disconnected from throw to throw, event to event. This kind of fatalistic, like the world is a magical place kind of view. It's actually the default vision of the future for many today. Or is it, and the roller coaster is kind of similar, but the path is predictable. In that sense, it's different. It is on a predictable path, but it has the illusion of unpredictability. Thus, it's like a ride, and with the joys and the thrills and the downs as well. Or is it like a river with many branches, or a road, or a tree with many forks? So, those are some metaphors that we've already discussed for the most part in a prior presentation, and here are a few others that help to express the worldview or paradigm of an organization, called The Future's Landscape by Hardin Tibbs. So we'll cover briefly the star, the vision, in other words, of an organization. The mountaintops are big picture perspective. The future is a chess set, strategy, and jungle, survival of the fittest. Let's turn to that one first. That's what's called dog eat dog competitive world. I've never seen dogs eating other dogs. I don't know where this metaphor comes from, but I suppose it just means animals in general. Predators and prey, and animals eat animals, and it's the name of the game is the survival of the fittest. Okay, and that's then applied to humanity as well. Or is it a chess set based on strategy? We have to develop a winning strategy that can enhance our effectiveness. It's the key to success. We have to be more clear about our goals and the means to accomplishing those goals, our objectives, so we can create more responsive organization. And what about the mountaintops? What's often called the big picture, the broader, interconnected, social, global context of an organization, the global drivers that are beyond industry, that you have to become more aware of, more knowledgeable about, if you want to be competitive, if you want to have advantages over your competitors, then you need to see the big picture, because that's what's going to have an impact in your future. Finally, the star, the vision, where, is the organization engaged only in day-to-day survival, or does it have a vision of the future to guide its activities by? Also, I want to look at, since we're dealing with concepts of time. We talk about the future, for example, and we can see that the current modern view of time or conception is quite different than that of different eras. For example, the ancient and medieval eras, which were more cyclical. This is actually even traditional societies, I think, throughout the world, or indigenous societies, for example, that are more based on seasons, as the way of of viewing time. Before there were mechanical clocks, in other words, the dominant worldview of the Greeks and the Romans was the theory of world cycles, the orthodox theory of cosmic time. The universe was understood as a fixed order, moira, in which a definite line was drawn between men and gods. Human nature does not alter, it is fixed by moira. The axioms of their thought, their suspiciousness of change, their theories of moira, which is similar to fate, really, of degeneration, cycles, suggested a worldview that was the very antithesis of progressive development. And if we compare this then to the theory of progress, which is, relatively speaking, rather new. I mean, in human history, it really came about through the advent of modernity. And the idea of human progress involves a synthesis of the past and a prophecy of the future. Its interpretation of history is evolutionary, with humanity slowly advancing in a definite and desirable direction. It infers that this progress will continue indefinitely, and that through the application of reason, usually accompanied by advances in science and technology as well, a condition of universal happiness will ultimately be achieved, which will justify the project of civilization in the modern era, let's say. This is the linear future, where there is a vision and a goal, and step by step we will reach the future. We will progress to the future, actually. So this contrasts sharply with the previous world cycles, our cyclical view of time. And now a more recent innovation is that which attempts to fuse the cyclical and linear futures. It's called the spiral dynamic future. The parts are linear, progress-based, yet it's holistic and cyclical at the same time. According to the Claire Graves, is a developmental psychologist back in the late 50s. Humans respond to life conditions by developing certain adaptive views and capacities, which he refers to as levels of human existence. These adaptive responses can be grouped into value systems, which permeate the culture of groups, organizations, and individuals. And each stage allows for the possible further development of higher stages or levels. And the levels are not to be seen as fixed, but they represent flowing waves, continuously overlapping with and are interweaving with each other. So, in spiraling progress, the dogmas of the past are challenged. Yet, the past is not disowned, but is what's called transcended and included at the same time. Its redeeming features are included, integrated in the movement. So, in review of part one of Pulls of the Future, we began with the Future's Triangle, which consists of three forces that make the plausible future plausible. The pushes of the past and present, we have to say both the pushes of the present, but we have to admit that the past is also evident in those pushes of the present, and the weight of history that which is squarely, positioned in the past, that acts as barriers to the vision, particular vision or image of the future that we want to see realized, and then the pulls of the future. But before investigating or to consider various pulls of the future that play a role, we want first of all to check how the role of beliefs and metaphors and different concepts of time determine our worldview, paradigm, and images of the future. So how much does our beliefs affect our future? Is it self-fulfilling? And what are the big questions of grand thinkers throughout the ages? What role do they play? And what metaphors do you use to describe social reality and the world? And then we discussed about some of the various metaphors of the future that we've actually talked about in the previous presentation, but also explore some other metaphors in the future's landscape. From the vision to the big picture, the chess game and the jungle. And finally, we discussed three dominant time frames that typify each era, beginning with ancient and medieval times and the cyclical worldview, and to the modern era, which is based on the linear view of time, and then finally into what you might call a postmodern or integral time frame that is spiral based on spiral dynamics. Okay.